Hey everyone, welcome back to Code. If you're new to Unreal Engine, this is the perfect place for you to start because in this video, we're going to be going over the editor using Unreal Engine 5.6. We're also going to be going over some pretty beginner things such as transform, rotation, how to navigate the viewport, in order to try to learn how to use the engine and how to create a game. So the first thing I did was gone ahead and just go to my library and click launch under 5.6 to launch this Unreal project browser. Now I'm just going to go to games, and what I personally want to do is just start from scratch. So I'm going to click blank, ensure blueprint is selected, and I'll call this project name something like my first tutorial. And I'll go ahead and click create. And now Unreal Engine will just compile the shaders and load all the modules needed and initialize our startup. And just like that, we are in Unreal Engine in a blank template. So the first thing I'm going to do personally, I like to hide my Windows bar, and I'm just going to go ahead and hold shift and click F11. You can also do that by clicking Windows and then enabling full screen over here, like so. And for this part, you don't have to follow along, but I'm just going to make my icons and text a little bigger so it's easier for you guys to follow. So if you want to do the same in case you're using a very large monitor, just head over to Edit and then click Editor Preferences. So on the left, it already defaulted me to General and Appearance, and that's exactly where I want to be. And in the Appearance tab, under the User Interface section, I just want to go ahead and look for my application scale. So I'll do something like 2, and as soon as I click enter, this is a little too big actually. I'm actually gonna do something like 1.25, and this looks a lot better and it's probably more readable for you as well. So the first thing I want to do is actually, this is kind of a large map as you can see. So if I go over to my viewport over here, you're going to see there's this kind of very large looking world with kind of nothing on it. So you can just right click into here and use WASD to move around. And while moving around, you can also scroll your mouse wheel and you'll see your camera speed get adjusted up here, just in case you want to set that manually. So I could set it to something like 160. And let's just take a look at how fast I go. So you'll see I go very quick, and you can use E to go up while right clicking into the viewport and Q to go down. So let me actually just revert that back because this is actually just a little too fast for me, and now that's pretty good. But I don't actually want to be starting in this level. I just want to create a basic new level. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and click file in the new level, or you can use this shortcut, which is Control plus N. And over here, you can start with an open world template, an empty open world, a basic, or an empty level. And for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and select basic and click create. And you'll see this little preparing shaders. And then I have this nice grid looking map. And you'll see it already comes with this player start. And you can see in our outliner over here, our lighting is already set up, such as our directional light, our exponential fog, sky, atmosphere, and so on, and our floor. And now with Unreal Engine 5.6, we have this new kind of toolbar, which kind of condenses everything into this top view over here. And it'll also show up if you go ahead and actually full screen your viewport. And in order to do this, you just click F11 on your keyboard, like so. And to hide this toolbar or to make it reappear, you can hold Control Shift T, like so that I can get a full gameplay experience like so. And if you want to hide these little UI widgets in your viewport, you can go ahead and click the G key in order to just hide these. So these will hide the icons and make them reappear as you click them. So I'll go ahead and click F11 and G again just to make everything show up. And as well as my Control Shift T, you don't want to forget about your toolbar because this can be very handy when making a level. So let's go over some of the tools over at the top here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just hover over my viewport related transform tools. So you're going to see these key bindings, which are very useful and very efficient to get used to. So there's going to be a select mode using Q, translate with W, rotate with E, and scaling with R, as well as a coordinate system. And let's actually just start going over these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Windows and actually open this panel called Place Actors. And now with the Place Actors open, I can simply just kind of scroll through. You can have a favorite section if you want to favorite everything, see what you've recently done, basics, lights, virtual productions, and shapes, and so on. I want you to head down to shapes and just simply drag in a cube. And with this cube dragged in, you'll notice that it appears in the outliner. It'll be highlighted by this little yellow outline that you can see all around it. And you'll see the location, it's negative 490, negative 120, 0. You can zero that out by clicking that arrow over here. So this resets the property to the default value, which is just 000. And it looks like it's halfway to the ground a bit. So I can actually just set the location on the Z axis to, let's try 1. Let's try 100. Maybe that's too far. I'll try 50. And this looks pretty perfect to me, so I'm just going to leave it at 50 for now, just because I'm going to play around with this anyways. Or you can also use this arrow to simply just drag upwards, and you'll see it's kind of jittering, and that's because I have my snap to grid turned on. So you'll see there's a snap to grid for my transform, my rotation, and also my scaling. So let's actually go ahead and check this out. So I'm going to reset this to the 0050 position. And if I were to actually just go ahead and see these, you'll see these translate mode, which is the W, and that's what we're currently on. So with the W clicked, you'll see these arrows already pop up, and you'll see I can move them left, right, up, however I want, and kind of just place the objects as I want to. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the E to simply just rotate. And again, you're going to see it rotating by 10 degrees at a time because I have that set here. So if I were to close these, or sorry, turn these off, and I'll turn all of them off, now you'll see it's much smoother and it's kind of rounded to the nearest decimal. And I can really just translate this or rotate this to however I want. And then same with the translation. It's not jittery anymore. It's very smooth and I can place these appropriately like so, and as well as scaling. So with the scaling, you're just going to click R on your keyboard to be able to pop these little squares up, and you can drag one side if you wanted to scale specific in the specific direction. And the E key is good for rotation. And then Q is just your select mode, so it'll get rid of those transforming tools to kind of change the position of it. And now let's click our transform tool, which is our W. So if I were to hold Alt and then click on this and start dragging, you're going to notice that it duplicates the object and moves it in the direction that I pull it away from. And this can also be done with rotation and scaling as well. So if I were to hold Alt and rotate it, you're going to see that now I have this cube on a cube, and it kind of looks like a really badly shaped star, I guess, or something. Not really what I'm looking for, but just to show as an example. But now when I do the Alt key with the Scale tab, you're going to notice that it doesn't actually duplicate. So just keep that in mind. It's a pretty handy tool to easily duplicate stuff. And overall, some really neat features in order to just simply move and transform your tools. And this will come really handy when we start designing our level. So next, what I want to show you is actually the world space coordinate versus the local space. So the world space will always be able to move any objects no matter how it's rotated in accordance to the actual world space itself. So even if I rotate an object diagonally and move it like this, then you'll notice that I can always move on the same X, Y, and Z axis if I'm in world space. Now, if I'm using the local space coordinates, it'll move relative to what is considered its front facing. If I want to move something in the direction that it's facing, proportionately, I can just click on this to select local space coordinates and just drag it in that very specific direction. So now you'll see that my transform, my rotate, as well as my scale is kind of angled in the direction of my actual cube itself. And then I can also keep rotating it, so it's going to be staying on the local. As you can see now, my Z axis or the blue arrow is simply just going in this direction, and if I rotate it this way, now my Z axis is going in this direction, and so on. And if you're not familiar on which color is X, Y, and Z, you can just quickly look at the transform tab over here under the details on the right side in these panels. So it's always going to be X. When you hover over, you'll get this nice tooltip. It'll be X, Y, and Z. And the X is always going to be red, Y is always going to be green, and Z is always going to be blue. So now with the magnet, you're going to notice that there are snapping tools such as surface, location, rotation, scale, actor, and so on. So for this one, let's actually try out the surface one. When I dragged in my cube previously, you're going to notice that the cube is always kind of halfway in the ground. But what we could do is just use the snapping tool in order to just increase the offset by 50 in order to just make sure that it comes in proportionally. So let's actually go ahead and click on the snapping, and then I'm going to check on this surface. The offset is still set to 0, so it's not really gonna do much at the moment. But if I go ahead and actually change that to 50, now instead of setting each of these cubes that I drag into 50 at a time, I can just go ahead and drag this in, and you're gonna see the cube is already gonna be starting with that Z axis at 50 like so. So you're gonna see a little bit of zero point 0.5 difference, and that's just because the floor itself is set to negative zero point 0.5. So if I were to actually just click on my floor, set this to 0, like so, on the location, then drag in my cube. Now it is at a perfect, almost perfect 50. It's actually 49.9999982 for some reason. But yeah, Unreal just kind of does that. And then I can just go ahead and actually reset the location, and it's just going to go back to where it was and get rid of that offset as well. But as you can see, I can just set my X and Y to 0 manually and just keep that offset that it came in with. And boom, the offset is working as expected. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this to 0. And now let's play around with some of the other stuff. So we also have this grid snapping. So if it's blue, that means it's turned on. So now I've turned this one off. And I can grid snap by 1, 5, 10,000, 1,000, and so on. So let's actually set the grid to 100 units. And now when I go ahead and drag my mesh, it's going to be going in by 1 meter or 100 units at a time. Now, with the 100, you're going to notice that you'll see that the cube is in the center of these 4 squares, and now it's in the center of the next 4 squares and the next 4 squares, and that's because each of these cubes in the default layout of the blank floor, so this SM template map floor, each of these squares is 1 meter by 1 meter. And it just helps keeping our measurements secure, just in case you're kind of relating things to real life. For example, I think on average, I believe the characters are 2 meters tall, about, or maybe like 1.5 or something. So yeah, just keep that in mind when we start working with our human characters in the future. But for this tutorial, we won't be really needing to worry about that. That will be another time for a future tutorial. And pretty much the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this grid snapping, and I'm going to turn off grid snapping and actually turn on rotation snapping, and I'll do 45 degrees at a time. So no matter what direction I change in, it will change by 45 degrees at a time, and so on. So it'll go up 45, negative 45. If you do it twice, it'll be a 90-degree turn, 135 and 180, and so on. And last but not least, there's also scale snapping sizes. So with scale snapping, we can go ahead and turn on something like, let's do 0.1. And now when I click R on my keyboard to scale, it's going to go up by 0.1 units at a time on every side. Let's actually try it by 10. So now this can only grow 10 times as big, and you'll get that big shadowy box if your camera or your view is actually inside the mesh itself. And then it will grow 10 times bigger from here, and then again, and so on. And let's actually go ahead and shrink this. So you're going to see the scale over here is set to 30 by 30 by 30. I'm going to go ahead and reset this to 1 by 1 by 1. And I'll go ahead and set my location to 0, 0, and 50 just to keep it on top of my floor and looking nice and even. Now, those aren't the only ways to set the rotations as well. Under here in the details panel, you do have your transform that you can manually set if you needed to. For example, if I needed this, my rotation to be 125 degrees here, and on the Y something like, let's say 90, and so on, I could easily just set it here. Now with scaling, you'll see this lock icon, and this helps keeps everything uniform, so you don't have to manually type in stuff like 2 by 2 by 2 or 5 by 5 by 5 and so on. If I wanted to just transform the whole thing at once, I can just go ahead and click on this lock and then set it to 3 in one of them, and the rest of them will go 3 as well. Even if I do some crazy decimal, they'll all kind of match the same decimal point and be the same size as long as I click the lock. And it's not just to keep things uniform as a 1 to 1 to 1 ratio. I can do something like, let's say I keep the Y as 5, and then if I click the lock and set my x to 5, you'll see that it goes 5 times bigger on my x and z, but my y has also increased by 5 times as well to 25. So it'll keep the same proportions and just be that much bigger. So let's go ahead and reset this to 0 by or 1 by 1 by 1. And another thing I noticed is that up here it says untitled with a star next to it. So this star means that there are changes to be made and we can actually change the name as soon as we save. So I'm actually going to save this level directly into my content browser by hitting file and then let's look for save current level. And this will pop up and this is basically going to allow us to select the path that we want to save this to and the name of our level. So I'll just call this something like tutorial map, and then I'll go ahead and hit save, and now it's gonna save in the content engine as tutorial map in here, and I'll just leave it here for now, and later on we'll go over organizing some things, and you'll see that organization is very important to know where everything in your project is, because you kind of don't want to make it a big mess mumbo jumbo and just have a lot of trouble looking for things when you need them most. When you click on the perspective tab, there are a lot of options that you'll get, such as perspective, top, bottom, left. So for example, if I click top, you will notice this little top view with the polygons, and I can zoom out and you can kind of see my cube over here. If I zoomed out even more, you would see the entire global sphere. Or the sky sphere and so on, and there's just a lot you can do from here, and this will really come in handy when building a level if you need a top perspective. And you can also click on this 4 button over here. This will kind of open up the viewport, and let me actually change this one back to perspective just to make sure that I can see everything. So over here we'll see the right side, over here you can see the front, and over here you can see the top. And I'll just go ahead and click on this square again to maximize my viewport because this is what I'm interested in right now. But if you wanted to change this to something like back, for example, then you can see the back side of the world. And let's just actually go back and let's change this to perspective. And this is basically just going to be how I can see my level, how we're able to see our level at the moment. And then we also have other options such as camera movement, camera speed, which we were able to adjust previously, and then the frame speed, our pilot, and so on. And it's going to say like exact camera view. And then there are other options to pilot certain objects, but because I'm selecting the sky sphere, that's not gonna let me pilot that. If I actually right click on this cube over here and you'll see these options pop up, we're gonna be able to see this pilot cube, which just means that it's gonna set my camera in the cube's default position. And now I'm actually playing as the camera. So if I go ahead and, well, I can't really get out of my cube here, but let me actually see if I can right click on the cube from here and click stop piloting cube. And now you're going to see this cube is actually angled exactly where I was just now. And it's even looking in the same direction that I was. I was looking down here or so. And yeah, so I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo that. Or you can also go to Edit, Control Z, which will say undo clicking elements, and it'll show you undo and then whatever you did last. And then I'll go ahead and hit Control S to save again. Just out of habit, you should save often. And then there are other options such as field of view, near plane view, game settings, default viewport, cinematic viewport. You can also create cameras directly from here, which is nice. See the game view, cinematic control. And you can also take high resolution screenshots. So this is really important, especially if you're trying to make high level screenshots of your game or even make thumbnails. So for example, I'll click G to hide these icons. And what I will do, especially for a thumbnail like on YouTube or something, is I like to go to this button and then click on high resolution screenshot. And I like to click 2 personally. I like to just multiply by 2 just because in Photoshop things can get a little pixelated. And then I can go ahead and click capture. And on the bottom right, you'll see high resolution screenshot saved as this. And then I can go ahead and click this to actually open this image up. And now you're going to see there's this nice image of this cube, and it's going to render exactly what we saw in our scene. And this already looks like a great thumbnail, but I won't be using that one personally. But overall, really, really nice looking screenshot. And then here's a little shortcut for the camera speed, just because this is a very usable, highly used tool. And then you can also see how you're going to render the current viewport. So for example, if you're working in a very dark environment, you tend to want to build a level, maybe a kind of like horror themed or something. You can go ahead and select unlit. And this will pretty much just hide the sky and lighting and just show the mesh in the colors it's meant to show. So there's no lighting affecting our cube right now or our floor, but we can see exactly how it is. by clicking the unlit one. And then you can also see the wireframe if this helps. Personally, I don't really like to use wireframe that much. There's also the lit wireframe, which is just the wireframe showing you your triangles over your objects while you are working in the regular kind of default sky environment. So I can even see this sky sphere surrounding my entire map, these blue cubes or these blue checkered patterns. And then I'll go ahead and go back to lit, which is Alt 4. Do not mistake that for Alt F4. That will close your project. And then you can also select things like detail lighting, um, as well as lighting only, and then player collisions and reflections and so on. And then there's this eye icon to hide certain things. So if you wanted to hide icons or cameras or BSPs or atmospheres, for example, now I can't see the actual atmosphere. I can disable anti-aliasing, fog effects. So now I can see all the way back there. Kind of no limit when I hide the fog. I'm gonna go ahead and show that again, just because that very black background kind of just looked like the void and so on. And these are just to make things visible or just in case you're kind of looking for something. And now over here, we have this performance and scalability tools tied to this viewport. One thing I really like is there are really nice helper texts with Unreal Engine 5.6. So I can go ahead and see the real-time viewport preview platform. So you can also see, let's say I wanted to see this in Android. I don't know, let's do Android OpenGL Low, for example. It's going to change my view platform. And this is actually going to be a pretty slow process. So feel free to just watch along and not actually do this yourself. And now it recompiled my shaders and it'll show preview platform on the bottom right, saying preview platform Android OpenGL Low. And you're going to see how it would look if we were playing this game or this level on an Android. And there's even an Android tab over here. I can go ahead and click on this just to revert back and forth. So now we're back in desktop mode, and this is back in Android OpenGL mode. You personally don't really need to do that unless you are going to be focusing on mobile games, or maybe you're making something for both desktop and mobile. And here's something really important. So a lot of people don't have super high-end PCs, which means that maybe sometimes Unreal Engine is really laggy for you. Well, the good thing about Unreal Engine is you don't actually have to you don't have to use the best graphics in order to use the editor. You can use, like, for example, if I go ahead and click low, or well, it defaults to epic because of my specs, but if I go ahead and click low, you're going to see there is some changes. It does look a bit I guess lower graphics and stuff, but it is going to be a much smoother experience. And let's say when you're working on a level or something, especially if you're working with Quixel or MetaHuman, even I do this and I have a 4090, is I like to just set things on low for now. And then if it looks good in low, it's going to look amazing in epic and cinematic and so on. And you can even ship it in a different setting as well. So for the viewport scalability, if I go ahead and change this to cinematic, it may recompile your shaders a bit, and you're going to see that it just does look a lot nicer. It may not be as transparent right now because the only thing we have is the default Unreal Skybox, this floor with a checkered pattern and a white cube. But I'll go ahead and just set that to epic, or I'll click auto, which is probably just going to look through what your computer is going to use, and it sets mine to epic. And then you can also set your material quality level to low, medium, high, epic, and then screens percentage. And then there's also screen percentage to change your resolution as needed. And over here for the settings icon, we do have the viewport related settings. So you can invert your right mouse dolly, you can invert your middle mouse pan and so on, increase your mouse sensitivity and mouse scroll zoom speed. So if I were to just scroll with my mouse, for example, you'll see that it kind of goes pretty quick, honestly. I also have one where I can click on it and then it'll just become a rolly wheel on my mouse. And if I were to increase to, let's say, 8, then it will actually zoom in way, way, way more different than that default 5 speed. I'll go ahead and change it back to 5 just because it is easier. And then we also have this level editor volume dB, which is actually the volume of audio actors placed in the level. So if you were to play sound effects, you can control it from here and kind of see how loud you want to test these at. You don't really need to make it too loud, but if you want to see how it is at max volume, you could do so just by simply dragging this all the way to the right. And I'm just going to mute this for now, but I'm not going to have any volumes or audio stuff in my file just yet. We have this dipper icon, which pretty much can show what kind of pane you want. So, for example, let's say I wanted to use a two pane, um, left and right, or even if I wanted to like pretend I'm simulating something like It Takes Two, I could do exactly this and then also change this into another perspective and actually pilot a different camera with this. So, for example, I could player one might be looking this way, player two might be looking this way, and so on. And that pretty much covers this toolbar itself that we see, but we still have to go over this top one over here. So this is just a quick save icon. And this magnifying button with a folder right behind it, this is just to quickly, like for example, if we clicked on something like this floor or player start, and then we clicked on this, it would actually take us to that actor in our content browser. But because we only have this tutorial map in our content browser, it doesn't really take us anywhere because we actually don't have any blueprints just yet, but we will be going over that later. And then this is basically our place actors panel that we see right here. And you can see there are some additional options such as Quixel Bridge, Fab, you can import content through here, content browsers, and so on. And I can actually open multiple content browser. I usually do this, especially when designing levels. So I'll put this on a second monitor, and then I'll have multiple, actually multiple of these open, just because there's so many assets that are required to make some nice looking levels. But for now, I'll go ahead and actually close this out. Now, this is actually our blueprint. This button is the blueprint button. So over here, we can go ahead and open a blueprint class, create a new empty blueprint class, even open a level blueprint. So let's actually go ahead and actually just test something out real quick. If I were to open the level blueprint, this tutorial map, you'll see it says tutorial map because this is the actual blueprint for this entire level. So let's go ahead and do something like if when we click event begin play, I'm just going to drag this out and look for a print string. And in my string, I'm just going to type in hello world with an exclamation mark at the end and hit compile and save. These nodes are called blueprint, and these are basically little blocks of programmable codes that get executed depending on when specified. So in this case, we have this event begin play, which is pretty much telling us that in tutorial map, as soon as tutorial map enters begin play, so on spawn, then we're going to print out this string that's going to say hello world. So if I go back to my tutorial map, which is my level, and then click on this play button to actually test it out, it's going to say hello world on the top left over here. It pops up for a second and then it actually goes away. So I can actually open this arrow and let's make the text color something like let's make it something like green. Hopefully that's not too hard to see. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I want the duration to be, let's do 20 seconds instead of 2. And then I'll hit compile. And we can also print this to the log, which is going to be important. So now let's actually go back to our level tutorial map and then click play again. And you're going to see it says hello world in green, just like we specified. And that log button that says print to log is actually this output log on the bottom left. This output log is really important, especially to find out if anything's, if you're getting any errors and so on. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom to see our latest events, you're going to see over here it says log blueprint user message, and then from the level tutorial map, and it's going to say hello world with an exclamation mark, just like we told it to do so. So the output log is really useful to seeing any errors or anything happening within your game level. It's a really good way to debug, as well as this print string that you see over here. And it just helps you kind of pinpoint where issues are happening and so on. And we'll learn more about that when we go over actually making our own games, because this tutorial is for complete beginners. And in future tutorials, we will be going over how to make actual games in Blueprints and C++. But for now, this will always be the base point of where every user should start with when learning Unreal Engine 5. So now I'm just going to head to this stop button, and the shortcut key is escape on your keyboard, which will simply just stop playing this. And now over here under platforms, you're going to see that we can go ahead and actually test playing this on an Android, iOS, Linux, Mac, and so on. And then you can also go ahead and adjust packaging settings and supported platforms. This we will probably deal with at a later time when we do complete a game and actually ship it and publish it on itch.io and so on. But for now, we can leave as B. And that covers our pretty descriptive tutorial for beginners in Unreal Engine, going over the full toolbar and the viewport guide. In future tutorials, we're going to be going over creating levels, creating games, more like a start to finish workflow that I really want to get across to many people. And we'll be doing multiple types of games. If you have any types of games that you want me to make, preferably something that can be done in one video or so, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Code of the Row. Like, subscribe, comment below what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.